Hello, everybody. I want to wish you all a very happy and wonderful, productive day. I want to introduce you to our Corex Academy, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. Before I actually start, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Corex Academy. What is it? Well, it's a knowledge sharing platform, and we facilitate collaboration and we support professional development in pharma, biotech, clinical trials, and the clinical trial services and logistics. We host events, webinars, workshops, and professional training programs. So our theme today is clinical supply and logistics and navigating crisis. We do have 3 great speakers today, and they will share valuable information with you. My own name is Noel Quinn. I'm the Commercial Director at Corex Logistics, and I'm your moderator today. So we hope to bring great awareness and some practical information to you, and we hope that you will learn about 3 of the following things: effective ways to respond to the crisis and conflict. Within that, understanding the impact of the conflict and the humanitarian crisis on the supply chain. To understand the planning and testing of alternative logistics channels, and designing effective supply chain resilience measures. We will also cover legal and regulatory requirements applying to the import and export of both biomaterials and biosamples for clinical trials. And within that, you'll understand the regulatory environment in relation to conducting clinical trials in EA/EU in that region. Specifics then in relation to the import and export of both biomaterials and samples. And of course, the current health of the clinical trial sector in the region. And lastly, then the operations update in relation to Corex clinical supplies and logistics, and some risk mitigations and some special measures that are being taken. So who is this webinar for? Well, it's for decision makers in supply chain and logistics leaders, both directors and vice presidents, some managers and senior managers at pharma and biotech companies, and of course, regulatory and customs leaders. During our last webinar, I just wanted to tell you about this. We had actually planned a webinar in February this year under the theme of sanctions, but how our world has changed. And on the basis of that, we chose today to hold a special webinar and change the subject theme of this webinar to examine and share with you the best way to navigate the crisis facing the clinical trial supply and logistics industry today. So why is this webinar important? Well, the conflict in Ukraine and the resulting humanitarian crisis is creating challenges for clinical supply and logistics providers trying to maintain supplies of vital medicines and medical goods. So how can logistics providers, how can they actually respond to these challenges to ensure that patients can access the medications they need and get medical supplies to where they're required most? And this webinar will try to answer these questions and discuss ways that clinical logistics providers can maintain continuity in the face of very significant obstacles. We will also discuss the challenges, the current challenges, and ways in which the sector can respond. And we will also provide all attendees with an update on Corex's current operations. As I said already, there is no need to take notes, as this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you by email. It is an interactive webinar, so please feel free to ask any questions on the Q&A panel screen. And please mention which speaker the question is for. That's very, very helpful. And your question is important. And if we can't address your question during the seminar, of course, we will answer you by email when we're in contact with you. And please feel free to add comments on the chat panel system. Each attendee, as a thank you, will be issued with a Corex Academy certificate of attendance. And then, of course, at the end, we do have a questionnaire as well. So please feel free to answer that at the end of the webinar, and maybe let us know what other themes may be of interest to you going forward and hearing about at some of our next webinars. So without further ado, I'll bring you to our three speakers, which is why we're here today. I'd like to first of all introduce our first speaker today. His name is Constantine Scharlowski, and Constantine is the head of life sciences practice in the Pipolaev Group. He has more than 10 years of experience in law providing legal assistance to pharmaceutical companies in CEE, which is Central and Eastern Europe. He specializes in solving complex regulatory issues, including those connected with intellectual property of pharmaceutical companies, with the localization of manufacturing in CEE, and with advertising and other methods of promoting pharmaceutical products. Constantine has vast experience of representing clients, large clients, in negotiations and within the framework of complaint proceedings, and in litigation, including disputes with supervisory authorities. So Constantine's presentation today is covering legal and regulatory issues pertaining to pharmaceutical activities. So he will examine the current status of the current clinical supply and discuss specific issues pertaining to clinical trials and the import and export of samples and biomaterials. So without further ado, Constantine, I want you to take over, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your presentation. Thank you.
Hello to all. As now said, my name is Constantine Scharlowski. I'm the head of life sciences practice at Pipolaev Group. My today's topic is dedicated to the current regulations on import of samples of medicinal product to Russia and export of biomaterials from Russia in the context of clinical trials. We will understand that the current situation will affect, and if to be honest, it is already materially affecting the economic landscape, at least in the CIS region. But we also know that the people who live here will still need a medical care. We'll need medicines, original medicines for sure, not only generics, medical devices, and other things. We believe that this direction will retain its significance, and it will remain outside of political discussions and sanctions. I'd like to start with the two main conclusions that we've come to while working in this area. Sorry for the spoiler. The first conclusion is that it's still possible to import samples to Russia and export biomaterials from Russia. It's still possible to conduct clinical trials in Russia. There are no prohibitions for foreign companies as well. Maybe it's even become cheaper to conduct clinical trials in Russia due to the current exchange rate trouble. Second conclusion, rules on import of samples and export of biomaterials in their core part, material part, remains almost the same they have been for previous 8 years, without any tightening towards international companies. There were two main outputs from the further information I'd like to share with you. And now let's go to the details. The first thing to say, the main three trend we can see has been playing the main role in pharmaceutical regulation in Russia, at least for previous 3 or 4 years. And even now, they remain the same. Harmonization with EU regulatory practices in the context of Eurasian Union legislation, which is based on the EMA approach. The second trend, accessibility to medicines. This is the main trend, and our society is struggling to solve this issue for some years. As I can judge, it's the main trend. We are speaking not only about physical presence of drugs on the market, but also affordability of drugs for patients, for clinics, etc. And the third trend, I would say it's debureaucratization. There are many attempts to simplify and optimize legal framework and procedures themselves in this area at the national level, at the Eurasian Union level. We see some results, but if to be honest, here we still need to work out for some substantial results, some more substantial results. Then let's see how these trends are implemented in the regulation of on import of samples for the clinical trial purposes. How to I would like to Oh, Lyubov, could you please previous slide?
Yes, sure.
Something went wrong with my Zoom connection, but nevertheless, previous one about import of samples. One more. Yeah, thank you. The present regulation of importation and exportation of medicines consists of Article 47 of Federal Law 61 and the Decree of Government number 853. The only major change since 2012 happened in 2021 when the new rules for import of medical drugs into the Russian Federation were approved. The general idea of the change revolves around a new type of permit document. The same type of permission as in biomaterial procedure. But this change, as we understand them, they have mere technical nature. There are no new restrictions or limitations here. So how does it work? How does this procedure work? In order for the applicant to receive the permission to import unregistered medicine for clinical trial purposes, the applicant submits to the Ministry of Health of Russian Federation an application using the state service portal. So not in paper, but using the special web service in the form of electronic documents signed with electronic signature issued in Russia. The Ministry of Health, within a period of not exceeding 5 working days from the date of receipt of documents, the Ministry of Health should send to the applicant a notice about refusal or a permission. The notice of refusal should indicate the reasons for such refusal. Possible grounds for refusal. It could be incomplete or false data, for instance, inaccurate info regarding the clinical trials details or something like this, or prohibition of the medicine in the EIU. And also it should be mentioned that no fee is charged for this procedure. Next slide, please. No. Previous one and one more. Yeah, this. Thank you. What documents do you need to enclose to the application form? At first, it's a draft of the permission. The second, justification of quantity of imported medicinal products, and also copies of agreement contract, copies of another document confirming the intentions of the parties, also copies of documents confirming the quality of the medicinal products, and also copies of documents, photographs of packages confirming the proper labeling of medicinal products, stipulating their intended use exclusively in clinical trials. We think that this list of documents looks rather reasonable and clear. Then let's see where we are now in the context of export of biomaterials from Russia. Next slide, please. Import and export of biomaterials is carried out on the basis of permission issued by the Ministry of Health of the Russian Federation, as well as we discussed previously about import of samples. The document is issued in accordance with the decision of Eurasian Economic Commission number 45, and procedure is established by the decree of the government number 673 and administrative regulation number 218N. The permission is issued for the duration of the clinical trial, the whole clinical trials procedure, and submitted to the customs authorities of the Russian Federation in order to get approval to import or export biomaterials. Permission can be obtained by the developer of drug, or a legal entity authorized by him, or educational and scientific organizations that may participate in the organization of conduct of clinical trials. To obtain the permission, to obtain the permission, it's necessary to provide the following documents through the state service portal. Almost the same scope of documents as for in the case of import samples are needed to obtain a permission. Within 10 working days, 5 days longer than in the case of importing samples, within 10 working days from the date of receipt of the document, the Ministry of Health check the accuracy of the information, request information, if necessary, from the Federal Tax Service, make a decision to issue a permission or to refuse to issue the permission, and send the permission to the applicant via State Services portal. Only grounds for refusal are incomplete, untrue data, or insufficient documents. No fee is charged as well. With regards to dynamics, regulatory dynamics in this area. Next slide, please. You can find the answer in the table. We see that all change has a mere technical nature too, except one which is connected with the requirement or right to file additional documents accompany the application. But in practice, as we can see, and as we can judge, the list of documents to be submitted remains the very same. As for the possibility to apply for the export of an additional amount of biomaterials, it simply means that if you would need to analyze additional quantity or materials outside Russia, you'd have to apply for the new permission. We have the same procedure again from the beginning. And in order to summarize my speech, next slide, please, the last slide. In order to summarize my speech, from the regulatory point of view, the current political situation did not affect the state of affairs in any conclusive way in the area of import-export of samples and biomaterials in Russia, which is partly evident from the dynamic of clinical trials conducted in Russian Federation, but we see that in 2021, the quantity of clinical trials conducted in Russia has increased. But taking into account current situation and decisions of some companies not to organize new clinical trials in Russia, we can foresee that numbers for 2022 may decrease. But in any case, we'd like to emphasize that as far as we know, there aren't any formal sanctions, neither from European Union countries nor from Russia and the Eurasian Union, which could be considered as a prohibition or restriction for foreign companies to conduct clinical trials in Russia. We believe that the clinical trials can save lives, and it's not about politics, it's about people and their ability to fight against diseases, not against each other. Peace to all, thanks.
Thank you very much, Constantine. That was a wonderful, it was a great presentation. Very, very interesting. Thank you very much. You've managed to bring great clarity to a difficult theme. And it's good to hear that the import and export of materials and running clinical trials are still possible. And of course, I totally agree with you that, you know, clinical trials are all about people. It's all about saving people. It doesn't have a flag and it doesn't have a color. Yeah. So I do have a question for you if you have time just to join us for this. So you've spoken about and showed us some examples of some procedures and administrative procedures. So are the deadline, I have two questions within the one. Are the deadlines set for these administrative procedures of import-export, are they met by authorities? And do you expect the authorities to comply with the mentioned deadlines now, taking into account the current situation?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for your question. About the terms and deadlines, so far as we can see, there are no significant issues with this. So we can say that there is no issues with missing the deadlines by the authorities. At least the lack of court practice in this area says us that there is no unresolvable issues, I would say. As for future, as I said, we understand that our country, our society would like to keep clinical trials conducting in Russia, of course, and would like to keep access to the new products, to original products as well. That's why I think that authorities are interested themselves to perform their obligations in a due time and in a due order. So I do not expect any any problems here with import of samples and export of biomaterials from Russia to Russia. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Constantine. Really
Thank you.
appreciate that. Can I ask you to stay with us to the end,
Yeah,
because
for
we'll
sure,
have a
for
little
sure.
panel Q&A,
Yeah.
and really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And
you.
now I'd like to go on to our second speaker today, who is Olga Alfyorova. Hi, Olga, how are you?
Hi.
Great to see you. Olga is the Chief Legal and Compliance Counsel in Corex Logistics. She is a chief lawyer in the Department of Legal Support and Compliance Control. She has many years of experience in healthcare regulation. Her other main area of expertise is in the field of clinical research and clinical logistics. And of course, Olga has extensive experience as a consultant to businesses specific to healthcare systems and contract research organizations, CROs. So Olga's presentation today is covering sanctions concerning clinical trials logistics in Russia. So she will present an update on current operations in Corex regions where Corex operates. She will discuss special measures taken by Corex in response to the conflict and issues related to medical cargo transportation. So Olga, I'd like to hand over to you. I'm really looking forward to hearing your presentation.
No, thank you for introduction. Good day to everyone. First of all, please accept my appreciation for attending the webinar. I believe that the theme of today's discussion is indeed on the front pages last month. So today I will focus on the main obstacles the pharmaceutical and clinical trials logistics sector faced with, and will update you on the current operation in the region. To begin with, economic sanctions in pharmaceutical sector have not been historically enacted, as this contradicts to international documents in the field of protection of human and civil rights, in particular to Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Notwithstanding the fact that economic sanctions against Russia have not been imposed on the pharmaceutical market directly, bank sanctions, border closure, and related difficulties have caused significant challenges to the pharmaceutical sector in the region. Key issues in clinical trials logistics in this territory relate also to termination of insurance coverage for commercial flights to and from the country, shutdown of the aircraft leasing system, and Russian countermeasures. Further, I will focus on the main aspects the business shall take into account when planning or conducting clinical trials in Russia during these times of uncertainty. Given the complexity of the sanctions and serious consequences for violations when cooperating with Russia, foreign residents shall ensure compliance with the sanctions imposed. The business shall implement proper due diligence procedure by having comprehensive review of the proposed transaction. It is very important to underline that restrictions relate not only to entities and individuals, but also to products, product components, technologies, financial transaction, end-use and end-user restrictions. By the way, the number of Russian individuals and legal entities under the sanctions are now more than 5,500. At this point, restrictive measures have not affected the products used in clinical trials much. However, they did significantly affected the logistics. In respect of logistics, more than 40 countries, including United States of America, United Kingdom, and European countries, have closed airspace to Russian craft. In response to the sanctions, the country also introduced similar measures towards 36 countries. This situation led to the restriction of flights not only by local, but also by foreign carriers. However, closure of national airspaces between Russia and most of the other countries is not the only reason for limitation of the air transportation. Major European leasing companies announced termination of cooperation with Russian carriers, ban on supply of the spare parts, and so on. Problems also arose in connection with the refusal to ensure flights to this region. However, all of this doesn't mean that the transportation of medicines, biological samples, equipments, and other clinical materials to or out of Russia completely stopped. As of to date, we continue carrying out international transportation of goods to Kazakhstan, Armenia, Georgia, Moldova, and back, as well as local deliveries in an ordinary mode. The same is for Belarus. Local deliveries across Russia are carried out as usual, with the exception of a few southern cities. To these countries, the transportation is carried out by the road. Pursuing our main goal, ensuring the health and well-being of patients, Corex team managed to find alternative routes for transportation of medicines and other items between Russia and the countries affected by the restrictions. One of such alternative solutions is transit transportation, which became possible thanks to the work of our office in Kazakhstan. There, we perform all actions required for cargo delivery at the place of destination, including putting the cargo under the customs transit procedure and booking for a flight. For those cargoes that cannot be placed under the customs transit procedure, and if the cargo cannot, if the cargo is not intended for clinical trials in Russia or Belarus, Corex Kazakhstan may act as a consignee and upon transit they are required goods to the place of destination. Unfortunately, the situation with logistics in the region is changing almost every hour. Our team developed backup transportation routes in various directions, including by air, by land, including from European countries, as well as by rail. Of course, due to instability of the situation, planning of each route is done on case-by-case basis, taking into account all possible risks and ensuring temperature regime. As an underline, when transporting goods, logistics provider must store alternative routes. In addition, fuel prices and freight charges have increased. Obviously, all of the above is currently making transportation more costly and potentially lead to delays. In addition to the restrictions implemented by state authorities, business has faced with tightening of transportation rules by air carriers. For example, Turkish Airlines now do not accept cargoes belonging to the category ILI, or in other words, equipment containing lithium-ion batteries. This is applicable, for example, to temperature sensors. Some carriers are reducing the number of flights to Russia. So, for example, Air Serbia did. It should also be noted that Russia has implemented protection measures, and it also shall be mentioned that Russia tightened custom inspection of goods to Europe and out of Europe. In response to the sanctions imposed and in order to maintain the stability of the economy, the Russian government has implemented numerous protective measures. Further, I will focus on the main legislative acts adopted which directly concern the clinical trials logistics in the region. On March 9, the Russian government introduced a temporary ban on export of certain goods outside the Russian Federation. Temporary ban extends on numerous goods, including certain types of electronics, equipment, engineering products, and agricultural products. The same decree contains several exclusions. In particular, the decree doesn't apply to goods originating from the territory of the Russian Federation and intended to be exported to CIS countries, goods exported in the framework of transit transportation, and goods exported to EU countries. For this export, we have another decree. On the slide, you can see the customs codes or the products used in certain cases in clinical trials which are subject to temporary export ban. The list of products includes, for example, refrigerators and freezers, tablets, phones, temperature sensors, and others. We would like to know that the decree will be enforced till December 31. So for those products which had to be exported in this year, if cannot be exported by virtue of the decree, which I will describe in details further, may be stored at Russian depots and will be exported upon cessation of the ban, I mean starting from the next year. The next ruling provides for possibility of export certain types of goods to EU countries subject to permission of the state. Such permission on export shall be granted by competent authorities, for example, by the Ministry of Industry and Trade, and for certain other by Rosdratnadzor and other state authorities. The list of goods which may be exported subject to the permission is wide, and it contains different vehicles, components, industrial products, certain types of telecommunications, and heavy commodities. Similar to the previously discussed, this decree contains several exclusions. For example, it doesn't apply to goods originated from Russia and intended for export to CIS countries, export in the framework of transit transportation, and export to the Republic of Belarus. The list of products used in certain occasions in clinical trials is almost similar to the list contained in the previous decree, and includes, for example, refrigerators, tablets, temperature detectors, and other products. In other words, export of goods which fall under this decree is still allowed subject to approval from the government and only to EU countries. Most of the corresponding state authorities have already approved the procedures for obtaining such permits on export, so the industry shall be governed by these rulings. Now, I would like to briefly focus on the aberrations in Ukraine. Martial law in Ukraine was imposed on February 24, and from the first days of action which have been occurred in Ukraine, our top priority is ensuring safety of the employees working there. For this reason, from the end of February, all our operational activities, including import and export operations in Ukraine, have been put on hold until de-escalation takes place. Our next priority is fulfillment of the obligations undertaken towards our clients, of course, to the extent possible in this situation. We have developed an emergency response plan and it took required actions to protect the products stored at the depot. The installed monitoring systems for temperature control and safety allow us to quickly monitor the situation. We have launched several independent backup systems to ensure uninterrupted online monitoring. An additional supply of fuel has been created for sourcing power system. We sincerely hope for the escalation of the conflict and ceasefire in order to continue fulfilling our core mission, providing hospitals and patients with life-saving medicines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga. Really, really appreciated. And you've explained sanctions and you've explained the effect on logistics and your Corex update on operations in Ukraine. It's very, very clear. Thank you very much. And it's clear that these challenges they cover every aspect, not just about logistics. It's covering every aspect of business relating to clinical trials today. So I want to ask you a question in relation to transport. If I understood correctly, is the export of thermosensors are temporarily banned? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So has Corex, they have a recent experience of any biosample exports? And the reason I'm asking is that biosamples usually are transported with thermosensors. So how does Corex handle this problem? And I suppose how would any other client or business handle this problem?
Okay, I understood the question. As per our opinion, inclusion of the customs code, which implies sensors, doesn't prevent us from exporting biosamples, temperature control biosamples. This is because temperature sensors are not self-declared products, so they accompany the goods. And we have already an experience of exporting biosamples, so everything is good at this stage in this respect.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Olga, again. And can I ask you please to stay with us until the end of our presentations, and we have a panel Q&A. If you join us for that, that would be great. In the meantime, I'd like to introduce you to our third speaker. Hello, Natalia.
Good afternoon to everybody.
And I would like to introduce Natalia Andreevskaya. Natalia is the head of Corex logistics operations in Kazakhstan. Natalia has more than 16 years of practical experience in international logistics, supply chain, and pharma. She's led the establishment, she's been responsible for the establishment of Corex Clinical Logistics in Kazakhstan. She has so many distinguished awards, etc. So for example, she's a council member of the WILAT, which is the Women in Logistics and Transport, which is led by the Chartered Institute of Transport and Logistics in the UK. Natalia is a well-known speaker within the WILAT programs in Central Asia, in business development, project management, risk management, and clinical logistics. Natalia is also a chartered fellow of FCILT at the Chartered Institute of Transport and Logistics in the UK. She's a nominee of the Stars of WILAT for Global 2022 Award from Central Asia. And she has, from 2020 in Geneva, an MBA in International Management. Very, very impressive, Natalia. Natalia's presentation today is covering Kazakhstan and what challenges that they faced in January 2022, which is quite recent. And Natalia will give us also an update on operations and the status of the clinical supply chain in Kazakhstan today. So without further ado, Natalia, I will hand over to you. Really looking forward to hearing your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel, for your presentation. Dear colleagues, dear partners, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us to know more about the business in Kazakhstan. Short update of the situation in Kazakhstan actually, and how current situation influence on us in Kazakhstan and our businesses. Everybody heard about the situation which took place in Kazakhstan in January of this year. So sudden disturbances broke out early in January, soon after New Year. The business and people were not ready, but the impact indeed was different, negative, and at the same time, now we have some positive points of that impact. They quite strongly affected the various industries and businesses' understanding of the forthcoming changes. By the end of January, it became clear that serious shifts had begun in Kazakhstan in terms of personal reshuffles, changes in legal field. In addition, this also has led to urgent reforms in various areas which are so important in Kazakhstan now. By the end of January, there was a complete understanding that the country's economy would not be frozen, would not be the same, and even vice versa, the development would pick up more rapid pace. Based on the measures that have already been taken before by the government, much better conditions for doing businesses, accelerations of many processes, and mutual understanding are expected also. What are in logistics and which challenges we had? First of all, Almaty International Airport, the same like other airports and some ground logistics hubs, sustained difficulties in their work. Work of international and domestic flights were interrupted. The lack of internet slowed down the work of systems of customs control and custom clearance procedures. The planned renewal of some customs bases and softs also took a little longer than it was originally planned. However, by the end of January, the situation had stabilized, and after the resumption of air traffic, the transportation and custom clearances of goods were fully restored. All cargo operations have been performed in due time and without any serious delays, even with enhanced monitoring of incoming cargoes. Foreign investors stopped some activities for a short period just to understand how to continue in Kazakhstan and how to continue with the new governmental directions which also took place before. The reaction on actions from the head of our country and our government were taken immediately to investigate the reasons, first of all, and the opportunities how to support people and businesses to restart their business and cover the damages which we held in January. Of course, the reasons which had been finally were not so bright, and there was the only way to aim for more transparency in our procedures and simplified procedures, less bureaucracy in business environment for local entrepreneurs, first of all, and the same as for foreign investors who come to Kazakhstan to do the business here. What we have in pharmaceutical development, what is important now in Kazakhstan? Pharmaceutical market of Kazakhstan began to develop as a priority even during the pandemic situation. And last year, a special program was released by the government to attract foreign pharmaceutical companies to work in Kazakhstan in various areas, including the localization of the production, and an emphasis on the development of research and development center and clinical bases. The active work that was carried out in was carried out last year is already beginning to provide an opportunity for a sharp development of the pharmaceutical industry in Kazakhstan. Kazakh Invest, jointly with national pharmaceutical distributor CK Pharmacy, had a number of important international meetings here in Kazakhstan and abroad with the players of World Pharma, such as Roche, Pfizer, ERG, AstraZeneca, Novartis, Takeda, Novo Nordisk, Celltrion, and others, took place last year, where the parties reached some cooperation agreements about further business developments in Kazakhstan and participation in different areas, from clinical studies to local production in the area of medical products. Some of collaboration were already signed some documents and already initiated this year. Last year, the Ministry of Investment and Kazakh Invest prepared a special program, Investment Guide for Foreign Investor in Pharma Industry. It is a set of preferences and opportunities to make the business in Kazakhstan more attractive and transparent for international markets. Legislation is also adapted to have clear processing and short start. Comprehensive plan of development of pharmaceutical industries for the next 3 years had been revised, and some new targets and measures are added. The discussion is still open and shall be closed till end of this month. Within the framework of the draft document, issues will be worked out to preserve the circulation of drugs under national procedures in parallel with the procedures of the EAU, reducing the rates for import customs duties for substances, for raw materials and component materials imported for the Kazakh production of drugs and medical devices, development of Kazakh clinical bases that comply with GCP requirements and EAU law. The plan includes measures of state support for domestic production in terms of determining the conditions for the application of compulsory licensing procedure for drugs, reimbursement of costs for conducting clinical and preclinical trials for drugs and medical devices. Of course, world situation has influence and a huge impact on the business in Kazakhstan, business and life in Kazakhstan, the same negative and positive. The same like in Russia and other countries, our currency is not stable. Currency deviation and currency deviations has a huge impact on the business and especially for pharma business, because the marginal prices in pharma are established in Kazakh tenge, and the distributors who import the drugs and medical devices and other goods, they have everything in US dollars or in euro. So, and volatility is the same like in Russia, and we have absolutely the same problems and troubles for our currency situation. Logistics deviations, especially from the West, from USA, from European Union, from Canada, we also have impact that our shipments are delayed because the flights are cancelled, and some flights have a lot of shipments which are going through Kazakhstan and via Kazakhstan to Russia and other countries. And the same, we see that the freights are increased, absolutely incredible. And some opportunities which we planned in Kazakhstan are also cancelled because of logistics issue, not only for air freight, but also now for the land. And commodities shortage. Actually, we see in Kazakhstan and our markets that there are absolutely speculative point. Even we have enough commodities in Kazakhstan, same the market react and the population react very rapidly. It's positive impact also and positive influence. Everybody heard about the initiative, transit initiative, One Belt, One Road, which took place 5 or 7 years ago. And Kazakhstan, the same like Russia, was participate like transit corridors for land shipments from China to Europe via Kazakhstan, via Russia, via Belarus. And the trouble for Kazakhstan was that all trains and all platforms and containers and the plans of China Railway had been released only for European market. And we had a very huge shortage of the plans, railway plans for Kazakhstan. And of course, the shipments could be delivered to Kazakhstan via China from Southeast Asia, and the transit time could reach from 3 to 6 months, which is incredible. And because China is our neighbor, and before we had just 3 weeks to reach from China to Kazakhstan. New transit opportunities via Kazakhstan, it's also the positive impact, because a lot of airlines and a lot of Other hauliers, land hauliers and railway shipments now are going through Kazakhstan, and that is increased amount of jobs and increased amount of activities in logistics area, also the same for our company. International business hubs relocations to Kazakhstan means, unfortunately, the relocation of businesses from Russia to Kazakhstan and to Uzbekistan, also just to understand how to work in Central Asia also. Additional permissions from Civil Aviation Agency. There is the first and very high initiative from Civil Aviation Agency took place last week only. Actually, any airline can get the permission for flights to and via Kazakhstan, and especially it concerned mostly concerned to cargo charter flights. So I think that in 2-3 weeks, there will be more opportunities to go via Kazakhstan to other countries with better and cheaper prices and freights for air freight. It also we see that foreign investors increase their interest in Kazakhstan, including pharma area. So we see more requests now to open the business in Kazakhstan, and especially big pharma now are more serious to step in Kazakhstan and start the business here or increase their participation in business in Kazakhstan. The negative impact of sanctions sets created the way of request for the opportunities to increase the presence on new markets for the world pharma players, from clinical trials and potential manufacturing. Just to remind you about advantages to step in Kazakhstan and Central Asia, it's absolutely new, and still we can say that it's clear market still in the beginning of the businesses here. Short highlights of the advantages and benefits why it is a potential market for clinical studies and pharma business in Kazakhstan and Central Asia also. Less quantity of clinical trial protocols still, as the area is just started to be developed at different levels, and we may identify it as a formation stage. There are more opportunities per every element of the trial. The market is open and pleased to take part in the trial. Selection of patients, it's indeed easier to invite in the program. Due to less active protocols and still developing healthcare systems, more chances to invite required number of patients for various areas. Naive patients, better clarity and quality in clinical trials protocols. So we may say the results will be more realistic and clear for further understanding how to develop the medicine further. National interest to clinical trial development. Governments in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and we can see that Uzbekistan also start to develop this area. They are interested in international and local clinical trial protocols in order to support the population and as a factor to improve healthcare system. Low costing in compare with the other regions. The costs are indeed quite low and acceptable for pharma companies with different budgets and different levels. Target to simplify governmental approval procedure. We already see the actions to simplify and speed up the procedure of clinical trial approval from Ministry of Health in Kazakhstan. And we see that new rules are officially implemented already. And same, we have a good news from Uzbekistan that in January of this year, there is a new legal aids are released with the target and aim to develop clinical trial area in Uzbekistan also. Logistics and procurement coverage, that we all see now that Kazakhstan and Central Asia has enough knowledge abilities and opportunities for cold chain deliveries, regulatory support and expertise in logistics sector. So, dear colleagues, thank you for listening, and wish all of us to be strong, to be patient, and never give up in our serious and important business for our patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalia. It's been very interesting, and thanks for sharing your update around the clinical trial supply chain in Kazakhstan. It's great to hear that even from your country's brief difficulty in January and the challenges that you had in January, that there is an immediate drive to improve and simplify doing business in Kazakhstan. I think that's including the pharma industry, which is very relevant to everybody here today. So thank you very much. I do have a question for you. It's from our audience actually. What is the most topical and challenging question now in the pharma industry for A, international producers, and B, for distributors of medicine in Kazakhstan?
First of all, the impact is the same on international manufacturers and for the distributors. It's the same impact. The first point is the regulation of limit marginal prices, because we import drugs and medical devices and pay custom duties and taxes from the international currencies, mainly US dollars and euro. So, and we have limited marginal prices for local distributors to sell the drugs and medical devices here. So this is the key point for distributors and for manufacturers who has representatives here, representative offices here. So, and this is the key point now to get some support from the government, how they regulate the marginal limited prices, because in other case that they will not be interested to sell their goods here in Kazakhstan, because they will not be any additional margin for them. So, and the market will not be interested for them. And the second point, which is also so important now, is logistics. For local manufacturers, logistics is a key, because we have some delays and some increased freights for substances, and as a subsequent we will see that the prices will be increased for the drugs, for medical devices. So it's not good for business and not good for population in Kazakhstan. So these two key points are under discussion now between some funds, between Association of Manufacturers in Kazakhstan, and hope that till end of March we will have more clear situation how to work with such issues in Kazakhstan.
Thank you very, very much. And in actual fact, on the Q&A, a couple of questions have been raised in relation to direct questions about the import of IMPs, etc. But what I think we will do is we will actually answer those. We'll share those and answer those at the end of the webinar by email. Yeah. So look, thank you. Would you please stay with us for our panel Q&A, which is going to start now. And just before we do, I just want to say that despite the difficulties being faced by every company and sector in these regions, despite the measures and countermeasures taken by the various governments, it is reassuring that they are being faced by the people on the ground with confidence and the belief that there are solutions. So it's clear in my mind from what I've heard today from everybody that patients are the #1 priority here. And, you know, it's great. It is great to hear. So we'll just start the Q&A session, and thank you for joining us again, Constantine, Olga, and Natalia. We have received 2 questions. We have received a couple of questions, but 2 I will bring up. Constantine, we'll start with yourself. It's in relation to the EA-EU regulations on the registration of medicines and other EA-EU legislation. Have they affected the rules of import of samples or export of biomaterials so far at this moment?
Thank you. I would say no, in general. Because as we can see that these rules have not been affected or amended significantly. I mean, but yeah, anyway, we understand that from the previous year, all registration procedures and clinical trials procedure should be in compliance with the EIU regulations. So we understand that maybe not direct, but indirect connection and interconnections could be here. But I don't expect that Eurasian Union legislation can lead to changes in a wrong way, I would say, because I don't expect this. And we can see that, for instance, several days ago, on the 17th of March, EIU Council adopted amendments to the legislation which will simplify some procedures regarding to clinical trials as well, clinical trials of medicines and also technical trials for medical devices. So we understand that EIU Economic Commission is also interested to keep the economics in pharmaceutical area to keep pace, maybe to grow in future, and that's why I would say we don't expect any so-called bad changes in this area. Only maybe optimization.
Okay, thank you very much. And can I just ask Olga or Natalia, would you like to add anything of your opinions or anything like that? If not, that's okay. If you have anything to add to what Constantine has just told us.
From me, not. Thank you, Noel. I believe that Constantine replied very fully.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, guys. So let's go to the second question then. And Olga, I will address this question to you, but both Constantine and Natalia, please feel free to join in if you have anything to add, any of your opinions or your experience. So apart from transiting through Kazakhstan, what other alternative logistics channels are available? And I'm sure, Natalia, you'll have something to say about that as well. So we'll start with Olga.
So our team has tested alternative routes, for example, using Turkey, United Arab Emirates, Armenia. These countries remain open and operating for most types of cargoes. Road and rail transportation is also possible. However, each transportation shall be considered on case-by-case basis, taking into account saving of temperature regime and by choosing the most optimal way to transport the cargo.
Thank you. And Natalia, would you like to add anything to that?
About the alternative routings?
Yes.
Yes, of course. Of course, we see that Kazakhstan is also alternative routing. And as Olga said, that we should check case by case how to support and how to keep the temperature and how to keep customs procedure, first of all, to avoid any deviation in documentation and in supply chain, in temperature regime chain. So that is important. So we see that the routings via Central Asia are also, as I said in my presentation, will be alternative one. So, and let's develop it for the future together.
Oh, thank you. And Constantine, would you have any comments you'd like to add to that?
Not from my end.
That's fantastic. Listen, guys, thank you to the panel. Thank you very much for your answers. Thank you for your time, for your opinions and your insights. There were other questions raised today, but we're not going to get to them today. But of course, what we will do is all questions raised will be answered by email. So everybody will get an answer to the questions they've raised today. So we're coming to the end of our webinar, and I'd like to thank our wonderful speakers again for sharing their expertise and their insights today. A special thanks to you, the audience, for your attendance and your participation today. And thank you. I hope it's been very, very useful for you. And a link to today's webinar recording and a certificate of attendance will be sent to your email tomorrow. We'll share the date and the time of our next webinar, which we haven't prepared right now. We will share it with you, and please join us at our next Corex Academy webinar. And let us know, of course, if you've any problem, if you've had any problem receiving your certificate or the link to the recording. I trust you enjoyed listening to each of our speakers at our webinar today. I certainly did. It's an absolute pleasure. It's an education along the way. Thank you guys very, very much. And finally, I'd like to say that from Corex to all of our attendees and our speakers, please take care of yourselves and others and remain safe in these very uncertain times. And we'll see you at our next webinar. Thank you very, very much, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you,
Thank
colleagues.
you.
Have a
Thank
good
you,
day.
colleagues. Goodbye and have a good day.
Thank you.